Hey, welcome back. My name's Justin. Today I'm doing my review of the Alesis Strata Prime. This is a very interesting drum set because it's the first time that Alesis has ever tried to make a drum set of this price range and, frankly, this tier. The Alesis Strike Pro SE was really good, but it was still a $2,500 electronic drum set, and there's only so much you can do with that kind of budget during R&D. The Strata Prime is that next rung on the electronic drum pricing ladder, and in my opinion, the overall depth of drum set they're actually giving you for the money as well. Also, standard disclaimer, I was sent this kit for the purpose of review, but I'm not keeping it, I'm mailing it back to them, and they're not paying me for this video. This will be a legit review with pros and cons. Today's video is actually brought to you by Edrum Center. If you're shopping for electronic drums, or parts, or accessories, go check them out with my discount link below. Okay, so let's start off with the sizes of the drums and the cymbals. You get a 14-inch snare, a 20-inch kick drum, and the toms are 8, 10, 12, and 14. You get a one-piece 14-inch hi-hat, you get two 16-inch crash cymbals, and an 18-inch ride. The kick drum is going to be single zone, the snare and the toms are all dual zone, and every single cymbal here is 3 zones. That means even the hi-hat, the crashes, everything gets a bell. In addition, all these cymbals are 360, which means that no matter how they spin, they'll trigger. They don't even have rotation stoppers on them. What they do have is the sound of a squeaky door. Something that I appreciate is that they've gone the way of ATV using a very small, discrete logo. And the reason why this is nice is that if the cymbals do spin away, it doesn't really matter because you don't have a giant Alesis logo right in front of you that's upside down or backwards. When it comes to the drums, everything's using a 2-ply mesh head. Although I'm not sure about the resonant head on the kick drum, it's also mesh instead of using like a mylar head with some foam, which makes a whole lot of sense now that I think about it. Why would you use a mylar head and then put a giant block of foam on it when you could just put another mesh head that's solid? Anyway, they're using some sort of mesh head that is not like the rest of these. When it comes to hardware, you get a drum rack in the box and a snare stand, just like the Alesis Strike Pro SE. What you don't get is a hi-hat stand or a kick drum pedal. You gotta buy that stuff separate. The drum rack is very, very heavy, and it has to be because these components are also heavy that it's trying to hold up. You're gonna wanna make sure you're really cranked down with your drum key on all the different components so it doesn't like bow or flex. By the way, I set up this drum rack a little bit different from the official photo. Apparently, you're supposed to have that bottom crossbeam a little bit lower, and this gives you the ability to really move your cymbals however you want in 3D space, because otherwise, you'll find that the arm will bump into that bottom crossbeam if it's up too high and they're too close together, like the way I've set it up. You'll also notice that this drum set has moved away from using quarter shells or whatever it is the Strike Pro SE was using, and these are pure electronic drum pads. They're kind of reminiscent of the Roland PDX 100 pads, but with air vents. And they're using a very, very heavy plastic. And if you turn the pad sideways, you can see just a little stripe of color along the middle of the pad. And then of course you have almost a full-size acoustic kick drum that's 20 inches across. It looks nice. It's using a slightly different shell color. I think the Strike Pro SE was like a sparkly sort of finish. Now moving ahead to sensors, the snare and the toms, regardless of size, they're all using a triple cone setup. So you got 3 cones that are sitting on like a triangular plastic piece that then has the piezo underneath of it. The whole idea behind this is that it's supposed to sort of spread out the hot spot to be a larger circle. I'd say it helps in that regard, but I wouldn't say it performs absolute miracles. It just gets the job done. It's not fancy. There is no positional sensing, which I was kind of surprised to see. Just the pads do what they're supposed to do. The trigger setup on the kick drum, of course, is going to be a lot different. So it's only using 1 trigger cone and 1 piezo and a much larger piece of foam than what they were using on the Alesis Strike Pro SE kick drum. So while the two kick drums kind of seem like they would be similar, they actually are different on the inside as well as the outside. Now moving to the sensor setup on the cymbals, I believe they told me that they were using 2 choke strips running around the edge of the cymbal, which is unique. I think that also has resulted in a slightly larger edge zone than normal on electronic cymbals. I noticed this on the hi-hat. The next thing is that the bells are very, very sensitive. I can trigger the bell by tapping on it with my finger. Also, the bell size is not uniform at all. Like on the hi-hat and the crashes, it is very, very small. It might be kind of hard to hit unless you have good aim. Meanwhile, on the ride, they definitely made sure it was larger. Something interesting about the hi-hat is that the open and closed controller piece uses a magnet in its design, which other companies don't use. Also, the piston that senses open and closed, that has a longer travel distance on this versus other competing ones in my collection, like a VH10 or a VH11. You'll also notice that there are no pad presets in the module for third-party hi-hats, or even other Alesis hi-hats really, other than this kind of design. So I'm wondering if there's something a little bit unique about the hi-hat controller. I see that there's a LED light that lights up when you plug it in. Also, I've noticed that if I have the cables incorrectly plugged into the hi-hat when I turn on the module will not recognize it correctly when I swap the cables. I have to turn off the module, plug the cables incorrectly, and then turn it back on. There are little things about this hi-hat that make it seem unique from other Alesis and other brands, so I'm wondering what exactly that is. The next thing I want to bring up are the differences between the Alesis Strata Prime and the Alesis Strike Pro SE, which was their previous highest-end drum set they'd ever made. So at a distance, they look very similar because the form factors are the same. But one by one, every single component, top to bottom, inside and out, are all completely redone and all new. The drum rack is different, the shell wraps are different, the hardware is different. These are pads instead of shells. You don't get that sensitivity dial on the side. You went from foam rods over to foam cones in the center, 3 of them, which is a design trend that I noticed last year with companies like Jobecki and Drumtech. And the cymbals are all brand new from top to bottom as well. Okay, so all that being said, now let's talk about stuff I liked and didn't like about the kit, starting off with the positive stuff. This drum set is very, very fun, especially when I compare it to previous drum sets that I've been making videos about that just weren't quite, cutting it. This drum set, you sit down, you have a good time. It's a combination of playing on solid, quality components that don't feel cheap, paired with very good sounds inside of the module, and these drums are not lightweight. Like, they kind of look like they would be lightweight, but these are heavy. I like the crashes and the ride, especially the sensitivity of the bell, because, I've got an ATV ride and I kind of need to hit that bell zone really hard for it to trigger. With this one, you don't have to. They're also thin, they're 360, and they're all 3-zone, even the hi-hat. Also, we have to consider competition at this price. You're not getting 4 toms from those competitors at this price, and Alesis does give you 4 toms. And finally, I like the mesh heads. I think that for a 2-ply mesh head, they don't feel overly reboundy or overly lightweight or overly flimsy. I just like the experience of playing on these drums. So now let's talk about a couple of downsides or head-scratching things about this drum set. The first is, I think Alesis robbed some of the oomph this drum set could have had by only giving you 2 crashes and also shrinking down from shells to drum pads. Starting off with the first thing, they've kind of conditioned us to expect a 3rd crash. Everybody else only gives you 2, but Alesis was the value king that gave you 3. And even though they do give you larger crashes, they're going up to 16 inches, and the ride cymbal is now 18 inches. That's great. But removing a feature that they sort of trained us to expect comes across as a little bit odd while you're increasing the price at the same time. Like, remember when Roland tried to take away a high tom on the TD50KV release, and then they had to put it right back with the TD50KV2? It's that kind of situation to me. I think a nice compromise would be adding a splash cymbal, so 2 crashes and a splash, so you're still getting 3 pieces of something. The second thing that kind of is head-scratching and robs a little bit of the impact of seeing a photo of this drum set is, shrinking down from shells to pads. The whole industry, customers, are pushing towards acoustic-looking electronic drums, but Alesis is swimming against the tide. And we saw what happened when Pearl did that, going from the Pearly Pro Live to the Pearly Merge. It just doesn't seem like the best overall choice. And again, that's not like annoying people on the internet saying this, it's actual sales. People like acoustic-looking electronic drums. So my theory is there like a higher end version of this drum set coming on down the line, like a year from now, that will have the 3 crashes and the acoustic looking shells? And so they shrunk down these shells to differentiate this kit against a future release. Who knows? That's just a theory. It could be right. It could be wrong. And the final thing I want to mention quickly before we move on is that I feel like the hi-hat is a little bit too floppy for its own good. When you close it all the way down, it should stay nice and solid and crisp. Like this ATV one of the same size. As you can tell, they just kind of respond differently when I have them both closed. While I do like one-piece hi-hats, this particular one could have benefited from going with a bottom, just plastic piece for that extra stability. Okay, so that's the pros and cons. Overall, I have a positive impression of the drums and the cymbals here. This is a nice, fun kit to play that does not feel cheap. And I like the progress that Alesis is making. Now let's move ahead and talk about space and size. This drum set occupies a lot of space. It does take up a big footprint in your room, so be aware of that. The next thing is that it's a very heavy drum set. So if you're one of those people that's looking for a pad-based electronic drum set that you can fold in half and carry out the front door, I would recommend removing the components first. This is not a lightweight, flimsy drum set. It is a chunk. Okay, so now let's move ahead to the actual star of the show, which isn't the cymbals or the drums, it really is the drum module. This is where they put the vast majority of their effort into this kit. So you can connect 13 drums and cymbals into this thing. For audio outputs, there's 2 headphone jacks in 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch sizes, so it doesn't matter what kind of headphones you have, you don't need to use an adapter. There's 2 XLR inputs and 4 1/4 inch input jacks that are labeled directs. On the audio input side, you get 2 aux inputs that are both mono, and Bluetooth audio is on the way, but it is not here via the firmware that I currently have, but I'm told it is in the works. For data, you get 2 different USB ports and an SD card reader. There's also MIDI in, out, and MIDI Bluetooth. This entire system is running off of Linux, and it really does feel like a computer as a general overall vibe. I don't really know of any other drum module out there that has support for a Bluetooth keyboard. On the computer side of things, it's got a 120GB hard drive, 4GB of RAM, and this is all running a 10-inch touchscreen interface. When you look at the back, you can also see like a vent. I think there may be a fan on the inside of this thing. The interface is kind of iPad-like. Think Spotify, but for drums. For this next part, I should probably mention that Alesis, BFD, which is a drum plugin library, and Akai, they're all owned by the same parent company, which is InMusic. I feel like maybe InMusic is trying to sort of get their different companies to advertise each other. So Alesis basically took the entirety of the BFD sound engine, or whatever you would call it, 1-to-1 and slapped it inside of this module, did a bunch of work to make a UI that would make sense on a touchscreen module made for drummers, and then they recorded a bunch of fresh samples for the module as well. If you buy this drum set, the odds of you absolutely needing to go buy Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer or get good drums are probably pretty low because it already has a drum plugin in the box and then more sounds on top of that Alesis recorded for this module. They don't fill up their kit list with a bunch of nonsense. You know what I mean? Now, I love an 80s snare drum sound. I love an 80s kick drum sound. I love like the Atari Pew Pew sounds that we saw in E-drums from the 70s. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of kits that you'll actually live with and need for usability's sake, you need to have acoustic sounding electronic drums. If you scroll through kit 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 30, most of these kits, most of the presets are actually usable, different styles of acoustic drums. So now let's talk about how many sounds you get and what kinds of sounds you're getting. So if you're talking about the advertising numbers, it would be like over 1,000 individual articulations. But as far as like real world, how many kit pieces do you get? That's 446. And breaking that down, that's going to be like 87 kicks, 91 snares, 63 toms. And if you tap on it, you can look at the list. This is a combination of a bunch of acoustic samples with a bunch of electronic samples they've grabbed from the Alesis Strike multipad. In addition, you can tap on it to hear it. But to make it better, they've also set things up by library. So if I realize I really like the BFD sound, so I just want to get stuff from there, or if I really like the Alesis Prime Acoustic, I don't want to see any of the electronic stuff, I can click on that, and then I can filter it not only by that library, but also just snare drums in that library. So that ends up being 34 pieces. You can also search stuff. There's a full-blown keyboard on this thing. So if I want to see all the Zildjian cymbals, I just type in Zil. I need to exit out of that. And now I see all the Zildjian cymbals within this particular library. Then I can scroll through them and audition them. I can even see if they were using a mallet or if they were using a stick on it. Now, as far as like pure data, like I said, this module has a 128GB hard drive, and of that, there's already 46GB of samples preloaded onto this. And that's across all these categories here. And by the way, they have all your user samples set up as their own library as well, which is very useful. If you want to import your own sounds, you just press that, and then you select like your SD card or however it is you're importing into this device. At launch, they told me that this will just be one-shot samples. However, they are working on a multi-layer round-robin sample import tool that will hit in a later update. They're creating a tool similar to what they built for the Alesis Strike module when they added that as a feature. The difference, though, is the kit size limit. This module just has more powerful hardware, so it can do more. So the kit limit on this, I was told by somebody at Alesis, is 1.8 gigabytes per kit, which ends up being 6 gigabytes because of streaming from disk. I don't know exactly what all that means, but apparently it's a method that TuneTrack and BFD uses when they're using their plugin stuff. And this is a plugin inside of a module. I think I see a RAM usage percentage slider thing right there that lets you know how far you're pushing the module. And as you can tell, it's not very far at all. Now, for the nerds out there that want to know how many samples and everything were recorded for these drums and how many velocity layers and round robin stuff, here's what they told me. When it comes to the Alesis specific library, and when it comes to snare drums, as an example, they'd record roughly around 250 hits on the drum head, and then pare it down to like 100, 150 during editing. It depends. Like if you can't hear the difference between sample 1 and 2, then you can cull it during editing. So that's around 150 samples that covers 30 velocity layers at 4 to 10 round robins per velocity layer. Something really surprising that I learned when I was talking to them is that they'll record less round robins for a medium level hit and way more for a maximum level velocity hit, because they know that drummers are going to play a lot on the high end. They're going to bash drums. All I can tell you is that I've learned over and over again that recording samples for drum modules or even just regular drum libraries is a very time-intensive, painstaking process that I'm glad I don't have to do. Now, while I'm here in this menu, something interesting is the way you select drums to edit. So I can either tap on the screen to select things, or I can press hit select and hit the drum and it will physically change to that. So if I hit the cymbal, it should select it. However, you'll notice it lit up, but it didn't actually select it because I didn't hit it hard enough. If I go over here to settings and I go down here to general, I can adjust how hard I have to hit the drum in order for it to be selected in that menu, which is really, really interesting to me. The next thing I want to mention is how they approach layering inside of this module, which they decided to call stacks. So you press this button, and now you have the primary sound on top and 3 other stacks below it. So here's something interesting you can do. Let's say I want to add an 808 kick drum sound as a layer to this main Gretsch kick drum. The cool thing is I can have it as a switch or I can have it as a fade, and I can choose the velocity it kicks in on. I could also see this being kind of handy if I wanted to add a clap sound to a snare drum. So for example, if I want to press that in order to add it, now I can make sure that it only triggers a clap sound when I play really loud. The reason why this is useful is that if I'm doing a buzz roll, I don't want to hear a bunch of people clapping really, really fast. I only want to hear the clap sound when I play really hard on the snare head zone. Now, when it comes to the miking situation, there's a couple of ways to look at it. So you could be in the kit edit menu like this and see the snare bottom, top, we've got a stacks mic, overhead, and room. But if we jump out of here and then we go over here to mixer, we get more control. Now that you can add an EQ effect or a compression effect just to the snare bottom mic. Something I found cool about this module is the way they approach dampening. As you increase the dampening little dial right here, you're actually slowly muting some mics in this studio versus other mics. Something else cool is that you can favorite like a snare drum or a ride cymbal that you really like, and then you'll have it in your list of favorites. In addition to this, you can create your own instrument. So let's say that you want to start with this snare drum, then you go over here to stacks, and then you add like a clap sound, you add this and that. You can save this whole instrument with effects and stacks as a new complete instrument. So now let's move ahead to downsides of the module. Number one, this is very much a computer in the fact that the startup time is going to be 29 seconds, which can feel kind of long if you're in a hurry. Also, the kits don't ring out as you change from kit to kit. So if you're playing this live, make sure the whole kit fully rings out before switching to the next kit that you're going to need for that set. You'll also notice some things like maybe this module isn't completely optimized. For example, if I go over here to mixer and I add an effect, as I scroll through this screen, it's not very smooth or very fluid. It's kind of laggy. So I just need them to like really speed this up. I remember the Gava G9 used to have a similar kind of problem where you'd tap on something and it would have to wait a beat before it would be selected. And they fixed that with a software update. So I'm assuming that you can just optimize this and get rid of that problem. Something else that would be nice is a loading bar. Like when I double tap to select a kit, it will eventually show up red to show that it's loaded, but not really. Sometimes it's all the way loaded, but other times it's like the hi-hat won't be there quite yet. So you kind of just have to guess when you can start playing the whole kit. This could be easily fixed if there was a loading bar built into the name that starts from here and goes all the way to there. I think they also need to beef up the trigger setting menu for the hi-hats because they have a trigger setting for the 14-inch and the 12-inch, but if you try to use like a DM10 hi-hat controller, there's no preset for that. If you try to use a Roland VH11 or an ATV hi-hat or a hi-hat from the Alesis Nitro Mesh, it doesn't actually have compatibility out of the box with any of that stuff. And the reason why I'm saying this is that they have trigger presets for a bunch of other stuff. When I hit this floor tom, I can see presets for the Strata. I can see stuff for the Alesis Nitro Max. I've got third-party compatibility with Roland, with Yamaha over here. So they're holding out on the hi-hat side of things. Now, something I didn't fully realize until way too late in the game is that apparently this module doesn't automatically save your trigger setting adjustments as you go about making them. So you can spend 10 minutes, fine-tuning everything, but when you turn off the module, it's not going to remember that stuff. I've got it on video happening. So what they want you to do is make your adjustments, like, adjust rim balance, then go over here and then save that as a new trigger preset that you get to name. The reason why I even came across this problem is that I had cymbals auto-choking themselves. I contacted Alesis and they were like, you need to go over here, you need to turn up the choke time, it's set to 50, just turn up to whatever, and hopefully that will fix it. So I'd make those adjustments and it felt like maybe it was fixing it, but maybe not, like the problems would come and go. I didn't really know what was going on. And it took me a really long time to realize possibly the reason why it felt like it was fixing it, but maybe not, is that it wasn't actually saving when I turned off the module. So anyway, I'm pretty sure there's going to be like, a dozen super nerds that will benefit from this, saving system that they've got going on. It's probably powerful in some way. However, for 99% of people, they would benefit from having it autosave every adjustment, because I know there's some guy who's turning up threshold every time he turns on this module and doesn't know why it's not saving. And while we're in this menu, I should probably mention that during your setup of this drum set, you're probably gonna have to dial out some crosstalk because everything is on a shared drum rack that vibrates. So the cymbals will ring out sometimes if you hit the toms. I noticed this myself, and I also saw this in another review on YouTube. So they got a nice crosstalk menu that you can use to dial all that out fairly easily, but be aware you're probably gonna have to do that. Also, I noticed that every once in a while, the kick drum will trigger a softer hit than I actually played in real life, so that may be something you need to work on in the settings if that happens to you. Now, switching to the back of the module, there's a couple of things that I wish were slightly different. The first is, I think they've actually reduced the number of direct outs you get on this module versus the cheaper Alesis Strike, so that's a little bit odd to see. I feel like they should have more outs, especially when they have a module of this form factor that is clearly trying to show that it's going toe-to-toe against the best out there. And it does sound-wise, but certain things like port selection and other things show that it is making at least some compromises here and there. Also, the aux input situation is a little bit odd to me. They decided to go away from like a stereo connection that most companies use and instead give you 2 1/4-inch mono inputs. I think they went this route because they envision you buying an Alesis Strike multipad and then plugging the master right and left outs from that into this module. But I feel like a lot of drummers, they just want to use a single stereo cable to plug in their cell phone and play the songs on Spotify. You can try to use a single stereo cable and plug it into one of those aux inputs, but it's not going to work right. So you basically have to go out and buy one of those specialty cables that's mono 1/4-inch that then ends in a stereo cable, and then you have to adapt that to your cell phone. So just be aware that you need this cable until they get Bluetooth audio. Okay, so I've covered the specs and my personal pros and cons that I liked and didn't like about various parts of the kit. Now let's talk about takeaways and competition. At this price, electronic drums are getting really, really good. $3,500, $4,000, we're getting drum sets that in some ways are as good as flagships from not that long ago. We've got the TD27 KV2. We've got this new Strata Prime drum set from Alesis. We've got the F-Note 5X. We've got the Yamaha DTX 8 series. ATV with different kinds of modules you can buy for around this price. Even the Pearl Emerge is around this price, and it's not as bad as people say it is. Like there's a lot of good options right now, and Alesis has added a nice competitor at $3,500. It's more than fair of a price for what they're offering here. Advantages that they have are a module that in a lot of different ways leapfrogs a bunch of what's around this price. This module is very impressive, very competitive. Getting 4 toms when everyone else only gives you 3. Cymbal sizes, a few years ago, the cymbal sizing here and the overall drum sizing would have been more impressive, but because everybody's upping their game, everybody's got the 18-inch ride, everyone's got the 14-inch hi-hat, Alesis, I think, maybe is realizing they can't just compete on having a big drum set for a low price anymore. That used to be a viable strategy. It's becoming less and less so because companies are wising up to the fact that customers are begging or really forcing companies to make larger drums. So Alesis has now focused on what they can achieve as a competitive advantage. The fact that they have BFD as far as like ownership in their company, they own BFD, so they can put it in a module. They can focus on giving you the big sizes, but upping the quality of maybe the components or the number of zones that you get. So they're definitely pushing forward, and I'm glad to see that Alesis is not resting their laurels on the high end. They're really focusing and trying to make something better than they've ever made before. Again, at the end of the day, this is not perfect. There are certain things that Alesis is known for, and you see those here and there on this drum set, but it is really good for the money. Now, I want to see them take that exact same energy and revamp the Command. I would love them to make a new version of the DM10, which they've just been letting sit there for a long time. There are kits that are better or worse in their lineup. There's a little bit of this going on in their lineup. But maybe this is a new direction. I'd love to see Alesis make better and better stuff because more competition is always a good thing. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.